And I'm supposed to speak in this microphone? Yes, that will be fine. We just realized that our abstract that you find in the conference program is the old version, so don't pay too much attention to that abstract. This is actually a ongoing research project that Walid and I will present to you. And we're both senior lecturers at the Department of Journalism at Södertörn University, which is located in Stockholm, Sweden. And what we wanted to do was to look into blockchain technology and how that can actually relate to journalism. And is this something that could save journalism? It's kind of a title to make you more interested. But we will see if we can answer it. I'm not sure. But anyway, by doing so, this is the aim of the study was to try to understand how can blockchain enhance sustainability of journalism as a business. That was what we wanted to find out. And we wanted to address this by looking at the potential, the medium, meaning the platform, the source as the author, and the message. But how to go into that? Well, we found this well-known theory by Rogers, launched in 1962, and has been working on it on and off since then, I think. What he's doing is talking about the diffusion of new innovation, and the diffusion means how do new innovations spread in society. So he says, diffusion, the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. So that is an interesting starting point when looking at blockchain. And by doing so, he has 5 attributes that he is actually looking at, of which one is the relative advantage, which is, as you can see, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as being better than the idea it supersedes. So is this innovation going to be better or not? The second one is compatibility, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as consistent with the existing values in the social system. The third is the complexity of an innovation, and that is how relatively difficult to understand and use. Now, if you think of blockchain, that might be a challenge, actually. Trialability, the degree to which an innovation may be experimented with on a limited basis. And the fifth is observability, the degree to which the result of an innovation are visible to others. So we thought that was going to be an interesting part. What we've done in this study, since it's a quite small study, we just took the first attribute, the relative advantage, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as being better. As you all know, technology, journalism, they are all, dependent on each other. They have a complicated relationship. But right now, it's also interesting to look at the power relations between these two, that technology is actually gaining more power over journalism than vice versa. And in this sense, blockchain is very disruptive and very much untested within journalism. Nobody really has looked at it so much. So that is when I will give the word over to Walid to explain this picture. Good luck.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone. My name is Walid Al-Saqaf. My colleague Malin and I ventured to this field because it's interesting and exciting, but at the same time puzzling. So we wanted to simplify, and this is basically the simplified version of how blockchain in this sense works. So first of all, let me explain. This is Civil. Civil is a blockchain-based project based in the US, looking into how to use blockchain. In particular, in this case, they are using the second biggest blockchain after Bitcoin. It's called Ethereum, and using it to create distributed newsrooms so that individual persons around the world can create their own newsroom on the blockchain. So first, the Civil's model is based on something called crypto economics. And if any one of you have owned or heard about Bitcoin, you know that there's value in it. So it's money that makes things move, incentives. So the idea is that if you are in a distributed news network, you need not to have a central authority controlling your news network. So that's in opposite terms with the traditional sense. Second thing, it has to be transparent and open. And so that's this culture of blockchain, permissionless open blockchains such as Bitcoins, that they are open to everyone, so everyone can participate. And so the third is basically it's immutable, so you cannot change anything on the blockchain once it's there. Basically what happens in the civil platform is that you start an application and you need to own cryptocurrency. Similar to Bitcoin, it's called civil. Civil is the token that is used in this project. And the way you do is that you buy civil cryptocurrency in the worth of $1,000 and then apply through a smart contract, which is basically a transaction. You send the money to this project and then they give you some form of entry in which you actually confirm that you have applied. And then there's a community voting process. So those owning the cryptocurrency can actually vet your news company or your news organization. And if you get approved, then you become part of the blockchain. And so what that allows you to do is to publish content and be recognized as a person that or an entity that's enabled to acquire the minimum standards. But then you also have the some possibility of getting challenged. And so if you get challenged, that means that someone has pointing out that you have done a violation in the Code of Ethics, the Constitution of Civil, which is basically proper journalism. And if the person who gets the vote, the person who challenges the license of the company gets enough votes from the community, that means that his case wins, in which case the license fee that you have paid will now be revoked and taken over and split. Half of it will go to the challenger and the half to those who voted for the challenge. And in this way, the community keeps a check on news agencies and without a single authority. Vice versa, the same thing applies if the newsroom proves that it has been accurate, but at the same time couldn't and the challenger couldn't prove otherwise. It's basically a framing attempt or some form of invalid accusation, in which case the newsroom is vindicated and it actually gains the cryptocurrency that's been paid, staked by the challenger. In this way, you have this decentralized system of running newsrooms. However, there are cases where you can have an attack, meaning that the owners of the cryptocurrency can be much more than 50%, in which case 50% plus can vote against the newsroom, and it can in fact be an invalid challenge, and it might not be fair to apply this. So there is an appeal process on the blockchain through the civil council. And if you go through an appeal process, and then there is, I don't have time to explain all the details of it, but you have a way in petition, even the appeal process through smart contracts. So it's a multi-layered system similar to the appeal court and the Supreme Court in the real world, but it's dynamically done through the blockchain. And eventually it can lead, as the flowchart shows, you can study it later, it can lead to either the newsroom being rejected or the newsroom being approved and the challenger rejected. All of this is done through mathematics, so there's not much to do with human intervention except for the last stage, which is, you can call it the final appeal stage. Then we've seen this has a potential. It has the relative advantage because it can produce less centralization, less control. It can improve freedom of expression because it allows newsrooms not to be subject to governmental repression. It cannot cause the market economy to impose its power on it. But at the same time, it's very early in the stage of development because the civil token holders are still not there. We don't have enough civil token holders because the idea is that they should sell enough tokens to the community to start the project, but the last sale, the ICO, had failed, and they didn't produce enough to move to the next stage. This means that the concentration of civil is still in the hands of the organization that started the project. So without having this amount of money distributed through the community, that means that still we are suffering from the same concept of centralization, but within the hands of the foundation. That's what they claim they'd like to have tokens distributed, but if people aren't willing to buy them, how will they move forward? And then the other thing is that they depend on Ethereum, and Ethereum itself is a blockchain like many others, and it suffers from certain aspects such as scalability issues, and it can be itself have its own weaknesses, technically speaking. And then the final slide is basically to say that it's not possible to automate all the process with this particular model, because if you have a particular council or a number of people taking over the Supreme Court role in this, then it's no longer totally decentralized. You still have elements within the network that are going to have some form of control, even though it still can be possible to overcome that, but it's going to require 2/3 of the token holders. And so the Civil Council wants to address this because it says journalism standards need to be held into account, that someone needs to moderate. But that brings us to the other question. Then, if it is not totally decentralized and if you still need someone to hold newsrooms to account, why is it using the blockchain to start with? Is the blockchain the right technology for this form? So we're taking this from a critical perspective, looking at it from the inside out, and the method we used is basically testing platform and using test tokens for that purpose. And that's what brings us to the question of what is it that the future holds. So these are our contacts, and we are happy to share future work in this domain. Thank you very much.
Yep. Fascinating. I think we should go straight on to Andre and questions at the end.
Okay, sorry, I can close this.
I think Andre is going to.
And it's okay. Page down. Page down. Okay, found page down. It's really, as the title says, and it's a follow-up to research we have done. First idea was that we done research on fact-checking and fake news detecting, debunking organizations in Europe. And there were many findings, and two findings were more interesting, that there was actually low level of transparency among these organizations. And the second, which is related to this topic, was that due to the amount of work and the speed needed for this kind of work, we wondered how they use semi-automated and automated fact-checking systems based on artificial intelligence in particular. And we found it was very limited, only very few cases, more semi-automated. So we wondered what is the current stage of this area, because we're not expert in this. And so it was the motivation behind, and these are the results. And I will explain you first the results, then how we came to these results, and what is the lesson learned. Actually, the lesson is very interesting and surprising to us. This will be in the second part of the presentation. So we have found this kind of 9, maybe there are more, artificial intelligence-based tools which are more or less involved in this fake news business. And as you can see, there is the first is the one, and then the last one is actually fight hoax. This is very interesting because we come to this last one at the end of my presentation, so keep in mind that it is in the last place here. The major problem here is, and because I like your presentation, you said there are some problems, it needs more research, and the major problem is that we have done this from the social science perspective. There is a much better, definitely, and rational way how to assess these tools. That the major problem is that you need to access to these tools to do experimental study. This is not difficult, but they have to allow you to access these tools to test them, right? So, but this is difficult because they don't want to, in all cases, to allow you this. And so there is no way. Otherwise, we have suggested this kind of approach, which is not so good, but is the, as I said, is the only probably available now we have got here. So this is the major drawback of this study, which we are aware. But on the one hand, on the other hand, as I said, this is what we have studied in the same way, and there are huge differences you can see here. And again, as I said, the last one is a very interesting case. We'll come to that in the conclusion. We have compiled together different criteria of this, as you can see.
I think we probably can't see.
Sorry.
You have to talk, pretty clearly, but also
Yeah. So we have a little time. Basically, some criteria, authors, basic idea behind, and relevant subjects. And I mean, basic criteria we can think about based on the description available, and we contact them as well and ask them for details. There was again, some were very keen to cooperate, some were like suspicious about us and didn't reply much, or initially. There are some more other details. As you can see, we check them, okay, but at least a rough idea that there are some data there, because there are too many data, I understand it. Basically, then we develop evaluation table. For one system, you can general data, for example, user target group, objectives, AI method employed, and many other criteria which we try to detect from these descriptions and available information for all these systems. And you can see table 3, the general data indicators of comprehensiveness. Basically, we came to idea that best approach would be how comprehensive are these tools. First idea, and second, accuracy. How accurate are they in doing their job in detecting fake news and all these hoaxes? So, and these are divided into smaller parts. Accuracy, and then there are subcategories like precision and recall. This can be done very easily. This more, as I said, the way when you can have access to this or rely on other studies. But we have found only a few of studies which experimentally tested these tools. So we have done this kind of description. And then we used assessors. 5 people assessed each individual tool based on the descriptions. We have identified the right descriptions. We contacted these creators, as we call them, and then they put there some data, as I will show you now. Basically, on this recognition of the veracity, we put there some weight. This is, of course, based on our idea can be criticized because you can say, okay, why 70%? Why no 75%? But this is, like agreement, weight. Extra added value, as you can see, these are the 3 major indicators of comprehensiveness for each system. I know it's difficult, but what can we do? And then you can see there was disagreement. That's another interesting issue. We couldn't identify correctly because there was not enough information about this tool. So there was some problem in this kind of methodological as well. But as you can see, we put also different weight to different assessors as well as different criteria. So it was quite complex. We tried to face this challenge of lack of information and diversity of opinions, that we put there different categories, criteria, indicators. Like here, you can see extra value, weight of parameters, you see. So it was very much detailed. So maybe the level of mistake was minimized in this way. Then we had also put in, not every evaluator had the same value. Basically, some were more experienced, they got more value in this assessment table. So you can see it. So it's wrong, like 20%, 30%, etc. And then you see how it looked like at the end. I mean, in the process, different values, and calculated different criteria, indicators, and we calculated that step by step. Actually by a colleague, because he's better in math than me. And there was these results which I have shown you. Basically, as you can see, resultant weighted indicator A, B, C, etc., and the final result. So some usefulness of this is that, as I said, there are different, quite huge differences between top and the lowest level. So maybe it has some value. And then I come to the second part, which is the most interesting related to this.
4 minutes, but I think no one saw that results table. Can you just tell us what was in it? Which companies were you assessing? Which products were you assessing? And what did you actually find out? Because I don't think anyone can read that.
Yeah. This is the 9 of these artificial intelligence tools, as we call them here. The names, or the claim buster, bait buster, fake rank, etc. And this is the final result on all this system, which is, I understand it's completely complicated for you, I understand, but the results show like 60% to the top to 25 something to the bottom. And all others, like we put categories like top 3, these are the 60% about, then we have like 50 and between 40 and 50.
Sorry, just so we get it. This is their usefulness in some sense.
It's a term of combination of comprehensiveness, accuracy, usefulness. Yeah, you can say that.
Just again, I'm sorry for interrupting, but the tools are tools that are commercially in use by news organizations.
No. These are not. Some of them have been tested. Some of them are like early stage, and some are no longer used, basically. What we have found, some of them were developed like in Germany, but there was just project that ended up no future development. So there are all different stages of really development. That's it's an interesting problem because they could have followed that. But let me show this final interesting part, which is related to where is it? To this. It's not here. This one, yeah. There was a, it's here, it's coming here. That's very interesting because, okay. The last one, which we mentioned repeatedly, that was the lowest, like 25 something, right? This probably gained the biggest attention among politicians and other stakeholders. That's for us shocking revelation. And this is this Fidox, and I'll show you. They claim this one, these ideas. 89% is world first, AI-powered algorithms, etc. But they themselves claim to be the best. You know, as you can see, this is their own description, right? And even this was from May, June. Big, promotion. They presented this in the European Parliament, these Fidox, and they also presented European Parliament office in Greece, like big achievement. Here it is. But another guy, by the way, Greek guy, they did this, what I was talking about, that we needed to get access and to test these tools. But he said, you can see the last sentence, experienced several inconsistencies when they tried to identify news published on the day of the test. So basically, it's not so great. And as I said, they achieved great, attention in Europe. And so I wonder, what does it say? First, because our results also say this is not so great. Actually, it was the worst among those tested. It gained the biggest attention in Europe in different levels. We actually got in contact with these guys behind, and they cooperated initially, but later on they somehow became silent. So my point is, as I said, our approach is not really the best. Best would be this one by this guy who did the Motivated podcast. But we don't have access to all these tools. But our results indicate that what is something gets attention's appraisal may not be so great at the end. But this is a tentative conclusion because we don't know others, but some supporting evidence is presented here by this guy who did this testing. So this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andre, and sorry for interrupting you. Thomas, it's all yours. You've got a much more high level. If what you're presenting is the paper that I read, and so keep it to 10 minutes. And also, I'm sure there'll be lots of material from that paper that'll be relevant to the conversation. So don't worry if you have to rush through some bits of it.
I will have to, yeah. How do I go full screen? Oh, like
You.
This one sounds like it could be. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Thomas Dodds. I'm a PhD student at Leiden University. So I'm in full imposter mode right now syndrome. But thank you for having me. My research is about how digital technology has transformed journalism. But I am doing it from an anthropological perspective. So basically, I'm looking at three spheres. I'm looking at how it has impacted the infrastructure, the temporality, and the form of newsmaking in Chile. So what I did, I spent 7 months of fieldwork in 2 newsrooms in Chile. Fieldwork means that I did participant observation and other ethnomethodologies. My bachelor is in journalism, so I'm a journalist, and that was useful to be among other journalists while studying them. It was quite funny, but I spent 7 months, 2 newsrooms in Chile. That also meant that I wrote for the web as a journalist. I contact sources and I report from time to time. Why Chile? Probably in this context is more or less unfamiliar. But Chile is a country that until the early 80s resisted with Cuba, for example, at a capitalist market until the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet overthrew the socialist government of Salvador Allende in 1973. Since then, a lot of industries in the countries has been deregulated, and especially the media market, and therefore that means a whole new level of competition between the companies and monopolies who own the media outlets. Why anthropology? Well, because what I wanted to do and what I was interested in is this idea of studying media, but studying it in the relationship between the human and the object. That means not only studying journalists, not only studying the technologies they use, but studying how both of them shape each other, how the technologies shape the journalists and how the journalists shape the technologies they use. Because I sometimes found in the literature this idea that technologies are imposed over journalists and journalists simply backed up and adapt to the technology that is imposed over them. I will say, and I will argue that from my fieldwork, I'm seeing something different. I'm seeing how there is a certain degree of freedom in how journalists can choose the technologies and how can adapt them in their everyday work. So that's why anthropology. Media anthropology, and also these 3 spheres that I talked before. Media infrastructure, that is something I was looking. So it's the materiality of the newsroom, but it's also the social relationships that the materiality of the newsroom establish. So who talks with whom, who has power over whom, etc. Temporality, work rhythms. This is pretty much in Tuchman work, if someone has read it. And media forms, literally the platforms that journalists use to express their work. This is a perfect example that I really like of cross-media when I was working there. This is a broadcast of the news with a journalist reading the webpage of the media where I was working on, and it's also being streamed online. So it's the 3 platforms of the media being expressed in one single shot. That was pretty nice. But it also tells a little bit, well, we can discuss that later, it also tells a little bit of how, for example, that journalist who is talking about international news relies more in the work of the journalists who are writing for the web. So that's
maybe something we can discuss later. This is also a little diagram with all my graphic skills pushed to the limit that I did of the Tele 13 newsroom floor. After many attempts, how they did is how to organize the newsroom in order to work better in a cross-media environment. So finally, after 3 attempts, they arrived to this model. So here you have TV journalists, here you have the web journalists who wrote for the web, who wrote articles, and in the middle, and this was the essential part, you have editors and producers, and in the other crescent moon-shaped table, you have social networks, the journalists who work only on social networks. And that worked for them, and it worked really, really well in the way that how communication flows within the newsroom. By having social networks in the middle, literally in the middle of the newsroom, they were the first one to learn when something happened. So I'm going to talk about WhatsApp later, but there's nothing better still in newsroom today than standing up and screaming to the room when something important happens. And if social network is literally in the middle of the newsroom, they're the first ones to respond. And they need to respond first, because social network is the first one that need to go out with the news. But they're also the first one to learn about when something happened outside. So they also are able to share the communication. So that's more or less my research so far. Chartbeat, super important. I don't know if it's common in Europe to use it. It's super common in Latin America. This tells you where people are coming from to your website, what time they are coming. So this kind of information shapes what information you publish in what time. So let's talk about, in particular, one of the things I saw. How am I doing with time? Do I have 5 minutes?
You have 5 minutes, exactly.
Perfect.
And you can speak into the microphone a little bit more.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Perfect. So one of the things I keep seeing over and over again was that how they use WhatsApp. When I arrived to the newsroom, because I was going to work as a journalist as well, my editor told me the first day, if you need to contact sources, just write them a WhatsApp, and if they don't reply, maybe then just call them. But first, always WhatsApp them. And for me, it was super weird because I worked as a journalist many years ago. WhatsApp was not a thing. So it was a whole new way to interact with sources that I was unfamiliar with. But I saw in general 3 changes that WhatsApp might be having on journalists. And this is the intimacy between journalists and sources, the obtainability of information, and the transformation of the temporalities of newsmaking. I'm going to talk about all of those right now. So, obtainability first. This is a quote from one of my interviews. I really like it, so I'm going to read it. So the editor told me the same information quickly reaches different media, some which may have resources, from medias with super high budgets, such as the newspapers La Tercera and El Mercurio, which have 10 journalists covering politics, to media where a single person is the medium. But of course, the risk is that many times, because of the laziness that we talked yesterday, you could miss important information. So this is an idea of how WhatsApp might be erasing certain economic limitations that media used to have, but not without dangers. The word I was looking for yesterday in the panel was de-skilling. So they're talking about how WhatsApp might be de-skilling certain journalists. Older journalists will regularly tell me during my fieldwork that younger journalists don't know how to make phone calls. And then a whole bunch of information is lost, right? They never make phone calls in their daily lives, right? I mean, if you see the students right here, maybe we can ask them if you ever make phone calls. But journalists, younger journalists don't make phone calls, so there's a lot of interaction with sources that is missing. So a lot of times I was interviewing sources and they will be like, no, send me the questions over WhatsApp and I will send you an audio. For me, that was massively unethical. But my editor was okay with it. It was like, yeah, it's the easiest way, it's the fastest way, that is how it works. And I was like, how we do follow-ups? Why? Do we need to do follow-ups? Work rhythms, sorry for the microphone. Work rhythms, the temporality. And here, for example, I have so the WhatsApp groups were key part of this cross-media environment in the newsrooms where I was. This is the .com WhatsApp group, so it's all the web journalists in there, but it's also some of the paper journalists are in there, the editors. Oh, okay. some of the paper editors, and we have one example of one of the web editors saying that there was a typo in the title of the PDF version of the newspaper. So right away, it was very fast that the paper editor could see that there was a mistake in there. I also really like this one. This is a paper journalist reporting live from the street. It says, it's in Spanish, but it says, guys, batch of information, raw data, and it says, it's that topic. It's the law of inclusion. And within 2 minutes, it was published as an article on the web, with the same data and everything. So the times of how reporting works has also changed because WhatsApp. And there is no excuse for not publishing, not working fast. There are immense ethical discussion in there that we don't have time to discuss now, but maybe the questions, please. And then, and the final one is intimacy, and this is, for me, the most interesting. This is also what I will read super fast, is from a political journalist. It says, sometimes the politicians believe that you are their friend, or they feel that they have an edge to pressure you or collect favors. They do not understand that this is journalism, and that even if you're building trust with them, it's a journalistic sort of relationship, not a friendship. The format of the, and this sentence for me is key, the format of the app blurs some professional boundaries. Why? Because in WhatsApp you have your family, and in WhatsApp you have your friends. And you talk in certain ways in WhatsApp. You use emojis, you shorten words, stuff like that. And when you're talking with a journalist a lot, or when you're talking with a source, sometimes you may get a little confused and you text the same way. So because there is a general rule of how WhatsApp works that hover over the platform a little bit. So there is a little bit of boundaries, and what is off the record and on the record also is a discussion that starts like being like, well, let me just say that. Usually every communication between a journalist and a source is on the record unless otherwise stated. But something happened in WhatsApp that everything is off the record without saying so. And if that level of agreement is broken, then there is a lot of complication ethically and in the relationship with the journalist and the source. And finally, because I don't have more time, so I guess my results and my research is an invitation to think about, not only, I'm not denying the possible positive effects that new technologies are having on newsmaking and reporting, but let's also not forget to think about this idea of dependency that technology generates over its users. And journalists are not the exception. How journalists, for example, today cannot escape using WhatsApp, even if they want to. A lot of them say, for example, in the part of temporality, they keep writing me at 11 at night, 12 at night, and if I don't reply, they get angry and they like block the sources, get angry and block me, and I lose like important information. So they cannot escape the platforms they're using. So let's also take that into account for when we're talking about new technologies, is this dependency and entanglement that we're seeing today in newsrooms. Thank you very much.
I don't know what to do with you. I think take it along with you, because I think we'll probably either, take. I guess one should probably stay in one microphone should probably stay in the room. Oh, you got one back here. Okay. So why don't you come up, Malin, Walid? Great. So any urgent questions from the audience? If they're not, I'm going to use my privilege to ask a few myself. Okay, let me kick it off. So I thought that was a brilliant set of 3 presentations, and I was very struck that the first 2 were really about taking people out of the process. I mean, in the end, they were about replacing very human processes with technological ones. And I was very struck by the fact that, in a sense, both of them were failures, right? And okay, I'm being maybe I'm being a bit too unsubtle, but it seemed to me that would it be fair to say about the blockchain one that you sort of compare what you were saying to Wikipedia's process. Okay, Wikipedia's process is one in which editors, it's very open. It's in that sense very decentralized. The databases may not be decentralized, but the process is open and decentralized. Editors come in, actually editors or anyone can be an editor. They come in. If they make an edit that someone doesn't like, there's an appeal process. There are endless discussion pages behind every contentious Wikipedia article which describes that enormously human process of saying, no, I disagree, no, I disagree, no, I disagree. And then there's the process on Wikipedia pages which are very contentious, which essentially, an appeal process. In the end, Jimmy Wales is allowed to say, I lock this article. So I was very struck by how much the civil process you described was a process that the web has already invented and in a sense understood from early on that there's something essentially human in it. And before asking you for a response, I'm just going to say one thing about the difference, it seems to me, between civil and Bitcoin. So if you think about, okay, so Bitcoin is in some sense a success, although which one shall I press? I don't know what it's saying to me. Should I press that one or that one? The left one, okay. So in some, despite what, I thought there was a very good statement yesterday by someone at the European Central Bank comparing, I can't remember the exact quote, fantastic quote about how, it's a Ponzi scheme, it's environmental catastrophe, it's unstable. But apart from that, it is in some sense a success, certainly more than civil. But if you think about the problem that Bitcoin, what technical problem does Bitcoin solve? It solves a problem which in the end is entirely technical, which is how do you make sure that a certain token of value has not been duplicated and spent twice. Now that's an entirely technical question, right? It's answerable. There's no doubt. Has this one been spent twice in the last 5 minutes? Is essentially the question Bitcoin asks and solves, and it comes up with an answer. And if the answer is no, it's a very clear decision. It says no. The thing about civil is it tries to take this problem-solving process into something which doesn't have a technical answer, which is, are you a valid news source? Are you a valid news organization? So would you accept this view that in the end, the project of civil was not original because the web had solved it already, and B, was misguided in trying to make something technical which was essentially human?
To be fair, when I did the interview, because in the methodology we did have partly interviews with the civil group, with the CEO and several other board members, and we asked them, this might fail, and this is in fact not complete Turing. It means that it's not self-sustainable. It's not like Bitcoin. It's partially automated, but then you rely on humans in the very center and the foundation, etc. And they simply said, it's a risk we are willing to take. We just want to try new ideas. No one can blame us for trying new ideas. It's basically, if no one does it, why shouldn't we? And so basically what they're trying to say here is that we can't guarantee success, but if no one tries, we wouldn't know. And so they are willing to admit for failure. In fact, recently they said the way that they ran the ICO wasn't appropriate in the sense that it didn't collect enough civil tokens. So it doesn't arrive to a position of saying this model works. It hasn't arrived to that position. And yet, there is some promise. For example, it would be for the first time that you would not need an authority to publish a news website that would be viable in the long run, self-sustaining because of the crypto dynamics, if it works, of course. That is the big if. The thing is that we are at the phase now of saying we are not sure that this might work, because in the long run it means that the foundation itself needs to be dissolved, and the whole civil platform needs to be self-sustaining without a foundation. Just like Bitcoin and others, the only difference here is that people would vote on the quality of news. I mean, individually, every person on the network would have a vote, but they will not be sending a monetary value. It's just basically the voice that will be the value.
Go on, Robert. Yeah, and please introduce yourselves as you.
Robert Anderson. Robert Anderson. I'm a journalist based here in Prague. Perhaps I could add something here, because I actually was. I'm in a project that is trying to build one of the distributed newsrooms under the civil platform. And we were obviously a bit disappointed when this summer the token sale failed. Perhaps just to explain a little bit about why it failed. Civil is backed by Ethereum, which is obviously a counterpart to Bitcoin. And obviously the price of Ethereum has collapsed this year, like the price of Bitcoin. So that was one reason I understand why the token sale failed, and that's why we didn't get our money. Perhaps just one comment, a couple of comments on why we were interested in this this idea of the civil platform. One item you mentioned, immutability. There is the example, of course, of the main opposition paper in Hungary, which was taken over by a government-linked oligarch. And the whole, as far as I understand, the database, all the archive of this newspaper is now not accessible. So the government was able to basically wipe out the whole archive of the main opposition newspaper. So obviously, if you have a blockchain saved date archive, this would remain accessible to everyone, even if there was a change of ownership in the media. I'm not a blockchain expert, so please correct me if I'm wrong. That's one advantage of this. Second one was that using civil tokens backed by Ethereum, we could reward journalists. We could also reward readers. For example, we could use readers to fact check our articles or provide photos, and we could pay them in the civil tokens, which was kind of clever way of, rewarding them somehow. Perhaps they could use the tokens to pay a subscription to our media, our website, that kind of stuff. And the third element is that we were hoping to part of our website idea was to fact check and to prove articles were genuine and had been fact checked. And as far as I understand it, the blockchain would have allowed us to do that. We could have something on the article which would prove, like a watermark, which would prove that it had been fact checked. It was a genuine article. It wasn't fake news. And this would, obviously, as the article was disseminated, this would give it credibility. And that was part of our ideas. Please tell me now or later if those ideas didn't work. But I just want to explain, that was the advantage for us of this platform. Obviously, it hasn't happened because the civil token sale failed.
Can I that's absolutely fascinating, and we'll probably come back to it. But can I bring Andre in at this point, because it seems to me that that the last point that you said is okay. So the blockchain would somehow allow us to fact check. I suspect, and I think that this is, it's a pity that we couldn't see the slides because I it looks completely fascinating, because it's not, in my view, a technology which allows you to say this is true. In the end, it's a process with some humans, and it seems to me, Andre, that I was very, very struck by the thing that you ended on. So the example and as an economist, this struck me particularly. I'll tell you why. You fire hoax, which turned out, I think you said, to be a hoax itself. But fire hoax. So fire hoax, you said the test showed that it's okay on the past, but it's not very good when you actually use it in the present. And so one of the things about news, rather like about markets and market news, is that it's enormously contested, and there are enormous interests in getting people to believe what is the case. And sort of back in the 1970s, macroeconomics was completely overtaken by this sudden realization by a critique which became very famous called the Lucas critique, which said, look, you have all these models which say, oh, the economy works this way, but as soon as you have something which says the economy works this way, the agents themselves have an interest in using that, and it no longer works that way. And there's a sort of sense, there was a feel of that in the result about fire hoax. Oh, okay, we now have a filter which automatically filters this stuff. And so what do people who want to promulgate fake news do? They take the filter into account and do something else. And we're seeing this, we had the scare 6 months ago or whatever about deep fakes. All of a sudden you could hear Obama saying things that Obama would never have said. And now you have people saying, okay, well, we have a tool which will find the exact pixel that has been changed. We saw it in the CNN. I have no idea, maybe someone can tell us whether that CNN clip story, was it doctored, was it not doctored, was it a deep fake? Well, okay, we now have a tool that does that. And then this is an arms race, right? And so the arms race is essentially driven by interests. And so obviously these machines are not going to be able to provide the final guarantee. Do you think, is there something intrinsic in these tools that will mean that they won't be the solution?
Well, first I would like to a little bit correct you. I was not so strong saying that it's a hoax in itself, but I said there is a suspicion because we don't know, all these details, and they were not willing to cooperate as one might wish. The second argument, we didn't talk, and nobody here talked much about that the social media themselves. They also developing rapidly tools which should help in this fighting hoaxes and fake news, etc., including Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. There is another front line, basically, And coming back to these AI tools, also there are different opinions. I'm not expert in AI in general, but how strongly quickly they will develop, this is open question. Some say, even Mark Zuckerberg said, they need 5 years to have a strong, powerful AI to fight all this, in his speech and before Congress. The other says we need maybe up to 25 years, So it's open, but even, as I said, Facebook itself says that they need just 5 years to be on that level. So I don't know. So, and this is actually a couple of months old study, and maybe there will be more progress. So it's maybe we are not too pessimistic in a way, but I try to be really down to the facts, not to be too optimistic, because it's easy to be optimistic, the future is bright, etc. But so I wanted to be down to the earth, more. That's why I was like that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And if there's no one else who wants to jump in, I want to bring Thomas back in, because it seems to me that in a sense, against these two examples of attempts to take humans out, you sort of in a sense took the other approach, which was to say, okay, let me throw myself into a bunch of humans doing this stuff. How, as it were, do they actually, how do they start to inhabit that technology? And I was very, very interested in your thoughts, which was essentially that, as it were, human processes get modified. I loved the floor plan, right? The fact that, okay, so down to the organization of a newsroom, humans have taken the technology in and have sort of as it were, modified themselves and modified their behavior around it. But that, in a sense, what you said was that those essentially human elements get transformed and augmented. Now, what I didn't understand was, in a way to pick up something Andres just said, was the tone of, there was a slight tone of pessimism. So in your example, which I don't see. So there your example was one in a very striking example. You said, well, they no longer talk on the phone, and on, there's this convention that what is on WhatsApp stays on WhatsApp, and that everything is off the record. Well, okay, you sort of intimated that was a problem. But the fact is that as a journalist, if you want something on the record, you then say, okay, I need something on the record now. You're very explicit about it. So, is this actually, where did that slight tone of worry and pessimism come in? Because I thought that you were telling a story of, look, we inhabit this stuff, it becomes human by our work.
No, for sure. I am from the position that journalism and media is what we call a socio-technical system where the human and the object cannot exist separately. They cannot be artificial intelligence separately from the human at all. So that we talked today about the Chinese news anchor, for me, it's less artificial intelligence that it could be, or what we thought it is. In journalism, for me, and for the literature I'm basing myself, is the human needs to interact with the object necessarily. There is no cameraman without a camera, there is no journalist without a newspaper or the platform. That's why I'm talking about platforms, the platforms they inhabit. A tone of pessimism is, well, not necessarily. I do believe that technology is making great advances in only with staying with WhatsApp in the way they can cover stuff, the reach. I told about deleting certain economic boundaries that now are not an impediment for a medium in order to report some news. But I'm seeing there was such a positive wave for me in the literature about technology and journalism, and that technology came to save journalism in some way, that my position is we need to be careful with this, and we need to talk with journalists and see what they are saying technology is impacting in their work. So, for example, not only with WhatsApp, but another area I'm working on is the physical impact that technology has on the bodies of journalists. So, for example, it's very anthropological, I know. But, for example, I have this cameraman. So everyone was super happy because if you think about someone reporting, you think about the cameraman with the camera and a truck with an antenna on the back, right? But now, by technological advances, you can have the antenna on a backpack with the camera. So everyone in the media was super happy because you need less resources and you just send the cameraman with the backpack and the camera. And that's all what you need to report. Well, the cameramen were not happy because now all of them have back problems. So that kind of ideas that, yeah, we cannot have a narrative about how technology is all positive and all flowers and all like happiness and we don't have more problems anymore. Technology has an impact because it's in constant relation and dialogue with the journalists they are being used by. So we need to see what's going on. In the case of WhatsApp, intimacy was a huge problem. Journalists could not sleep sometimes easy because senators or congressmen will text them at 1 in the morning and they needed to respond. So there has psychological, social impacts that we need to observe. So it's not to be pessimist, but it's more to be realist, I will say.
Malin, do you have something to add here? And then we've got a question in the back.
Yeah, but you said.
I mean, I'd like to.
Go on, Malin.
I mean, she is the one talking very well about the theory side. And one thing that you mentioned about token sale, it was very awkward and difficult and complex. And people couldn't know how to buy because the questions are very difficult to answer. And that's maybe one very major reason why it failed. But that brings us to the point of complexity. And maybe, Malin, you can point to that.
That's what you meant. He had something that he wanted me to say, and I didn't really quite understand what it was. Okay, yeah, if you look at Roger's theory, and I'm thinking about your big speech about technology coming in, they're stepping in and doing all these things. It is interesting. So study Rogers, because you have all these different, what is making an innovation then successful? Complexity is one of the things, but there are millions of innovations that come every year. But what is really successful, so it's
and maybe actually it's the ones that we manage to inhabit.
Yeah.
Pushing up to whatever boundaries. And I completely take Thomas's point that we always do push up to the boundaries, but maybe there's something like that in the Rogers thesis.
Yeah, exactly, and also the timing of things.
Let's take it to the back, and do introduce yourself.
My name is Ines. I'm a journalist from Berlin, and I'm wondering, when you're talking about WhatsApp, the question about security, because my experience is that if I would have WhatsApp on my phone, my colleagues would rather kill me. Yeah, so because it's very unsecure. So you open all your sources, all your data. It's very easy to hack. In the rise of the anti-democratic forces, so the discourse about how you can protect your data, your sources, is a big issue. And I'm also in the realm of technology, of course. So I was wondering how you tackle this, or how this issue is tackled in the context you made research up on, and in general. I mean, we are in a situation of rising anti-democratic forces. And they are using also technology in a very, very smart way and an innovative way. How do we react? And their technology is part of it. So maybe you can.
That is an amazing question. Thank you so much. Because I talk about with them about that, and they're in a I don't like to use this word incorrectly, but it's schizophrenic situation. The journalists, where actually they feel that WhatsApp is a secure thing. I know I start my presentation talking about the dictatorship and how Chile was in a dictatorship context, but since then, since 1990, it's a very stable country. We don't expect in any near future any anti-democratic movement or anything as such, but they actually feel secure, and they feel it secure because WhatsApp has certain elements that make them feel secure. So, for example, the double blue check for them it's this sense of immediacy that makes them feel like it's working. It makes them feel because the source got the message, the response is going to be fast. But, for example, some of the journalists told me, I don't know if I should say this outside my. But some of the journalists told me about senators sending them voice records when they were drunk, they were a little tipsy, for example. And that kind of information, it's very damaging in any context. And yet, the rules of the profession don't allow them to share the messages. And what I'm saying, it's weird because it's off the record. Everything's off the record on WhatsApp. When they work on the record every other time. Every phone call they made is on the record. Every email they every human interpersonal interaction is on the record. In terms of security, they don't really think about that. They assume that because of the context of the country, it's secure, and they get a lot of benefits. So, for example, they don't use Telegram at all or any other application, but I think it's the benefits, the immediacy they get that attracts them to keep coming back over and over and over again to WhatsApp. So it's a great question because there is no reflection at all in that. And that's an interesting point to see.
Can I jump in with a reflection here? Because I think that's completely fascinating. And there have been these really interesting stories that I'm sure you've all seen and probably know better than me about the ways in which, so a bit of context, which is that WhatsApp, of course, was bought by Facebook, and under a pledge to the owners that they wouldn't that there was a pledge to the Commission that the European Commission with the takeover, they wouldn't share data, and to the owners they wouldn't change the business model. And if you remember the business model, it was everyone pays us $1 on arriving and nothing, or $1 a year or something, nothing ever after. And both of those pledges went out of the window. And in fact, Facebook was fined by the Commission for that pledge going out of the window. So there then have been stories about the way in which, I get these requests, these suggested friends on Facebook. How does Facebook know that this is a suggested friend? So this is protecting sources. So if you have a source on WhatsApp, and then suddenly it becomes a suggested friend on Facebook, and then it becomes an account on Instagram that you should follow, there have then been all these wonderful bits of investigative journalism that have said, oh, look, we can discover that so-and-so knows so-and-so. Why do they know them, etc. So there are these very subtle ways in which you're revealing data and revealing sources by using the tools that are deeply embedded in the tools' business models. And so the question I had there is, is one of the solutions, you mentioned Telegram, I don't know that that's got a more trusted model, but is one of the solutions for journalists to, actually start owning their tools in some sense?
But I think that not only that, in a more mundane case, they have all, so WhatsApp is basically a library of all your conversations with sources. And not only, let's not think about hacking in a big scale, let's think about a journalist losing their phone or leaving their phone somewhere or leaving web WhatsApp open on a computer. It's a huge risk. But I think it's because Chile is today, in particular this country, just always in this country, Chile is today a context of such democratic, so pink today democratically, that they don't feel they're super responsible in that, and they're aware they're irresponsible, but they don't care because WhatsApp is so beneficial in so other ways. But it's a huge risk. It's like a truck.
We have 5 minutes, so get your questions together. We've got two panelists who want to say something, and we have one more, but only 5 more minutes for questions. Go on. Walid and that. Sorry, go on, Andre, and then Walid.
Tomasz, actually, a question. You presented to us this very nice newsroom and centralized, but I would expect something like more decentralized, basically more digital newsroom, because I don't see necessary to have all these people in one room, from different media. I mean, you can be decentralized over the country, basically. You have local reporters there and one digital newsroom, basically. I mean, I know it's utopian, but this is maybe too old-fashioned on the other hand.
Before you take that, let's do Walid's comment, and then we'll go back to that, because it's a good question.
It's useful to reflect on the internet. The internet started because they do not want to have a single power entity that controls the whole network. And so decentralization was the basis of success of certain solutions. And when we come to the idea of proprietary, copyrighted code, that means that no matter what you do with Facebook, we can't really know the algorithms that are being played out. And that's where the ideas behind Bitcoin, for example, and CryptoPunk culture of let us remove power from the intermediaries or from the centers and send them and have them in the edges of the network. That's the only long-term scalable solution.
And wait, there was a question here. Let's take that comment before we go back to...
Well, this is a general one for the panel, and perhaps, I'm a media professor from the United States.
Sorry, introduce yourself, your name?
Vladimir Bradic, from Virginia, United States. This comes a little bit of a sort of pushback against the moderators, pushback against the panel. So if you just catch my drift here. I think we're being overly critical of the hiccups and let's call them failures, for the lack of a better word, of the technological entry into some of these communication problems, to take these small initial failures to be general status, to call technology basically generally failure, I think is very short-sighted. It's also human-centric. We have to realize it's the period of time in which we are dealing with right now. This is just, we're talking about a machine learning being here for about 6 or 7 years. We're talking about Twitter being here for 10. We're talking about Facebook being here for 12 years. Comparing this to anything else, it took 50 years for us to realize, to invent, from the first books when they're printed to the moment we actually decided to put book page numbers on the books. It took 50 years for that to happen. This would be like being with Marconi in the room as he's thinking about radio. And for us to be so critical over such short period of time and make claims about technological inability to change, I think it's just short-sighted.
Well, thank you. I think
let's go down the panel very rapidly. I think there's 30 seconds each.
Well,
go on.
Maybe because of my background, I actually think we're not being critical enough. I think we've seen a lot of what the consequences of not being critical with the technology we're using has had on journalism and other spheres of our life. So maybe it's because of my background, of like what I'm studying or where I come from. We need to be paying attention to the technologies, and we need to be paying attention to the effects and the consequences it has over our profession, over our lives. And in particular, that was Spanish. In particular, about your question, why not separately? Why not more digital? Because that's why there is a quote, and I'm sorry if I offend someone, by Klinenberg that says that unless media scholars goes to the newsroom, they can only speculate what's going on inside. You can direct your angry letters to him. And I actually agree. By going to the newsroom, I learned that screaming is by far the best tool, because when time is everything, when time is money, when time, you beat another media by seconds of publishing a news article, screaming across the newsroom is the best way today, even with all the technology we have, to beat another media in time of publishing.
Andre, your wrap-up thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, last comment from the public audience was, I mean, I agree with that. I said that, that this is the current situation here, and we should be reasonable, optimists, let's say, but not too much, because it's easy to be utopian, optimist, whatever. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I agree with you. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, creativity in human beings evolves over time. So it means that if we face problems, we can always improvise and find solutions. So that is what I think the gist of your idea is, and I totally agree. And we should give them breathing space. And had the governments shut down the internet from the beginning, we wouldn't have arrived to it today. And it had many problems, still has.
Yeah, I agree with you too, that you have to look at it over time, of course. But that's what we're here for, to try to understand, to study, to come with comments, to do our best to understand what's going on. Yeah, this is an evolving time, actually, with a lot of things happening. And not the least within, like you mentioned, within Facebook and all kinds of societal changes. So we're here to study it and enjoying it at the same time. Thank you.
So since the pushback was addressed to me, so I think I agree with the panel. I think that it's extraordinarily constructive to be critical, and critical doesn't mean blaming them and doesn't mean saying they're bad people, but it's saying, look, this is no good, and we have to say that because that's exactly how you improve that. And if we always only ever say, "Yay, this is great," then we don't shape it in the way in which it should be shaped. This is exactly how the market works, right? You have to provide, or AI works, you have to provide the feedback loop. And where things aren't working and aren't good, so, if the machines aren't producing filters that work for fake news, we have to say to the social media platforms, you've got to employ people there. Don't make us wait 5 years for the machines to get it right.